introducing a new sponsor, and I just from here forth, instead of me just kind of, oh, hey, what are the talking points of me rambling on about, I want to interview him. And David Barnett of BusinessBuyerAdvantage.com is here with me. David, why don't you say hello so everyone can see your face?
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Good. So, and basically, I want David, from what I've gleaned and when we've been talking, you're basically a business broker, consultant, advisor, correct? That's about kind of an accurate assessment.
Yeah, I used to be an actual business broker, and I left that business model quite a few years ago, and now I'm more of a consultant. I call myself a private transaction advisor because what I say is that I help people buy and sell on their own. So I coach people through the process and help them do the things that they have trouble doing for themselves. But I don't represent any parties, and I don't work for a commission. I work more like an attorney or an accountant would, in that they do something for you and then they send you a bill.
Right. So you would probably be if someone's looking to buy a business or is looking to get an entrepreneurship or something like that, you would be the first person to contact them rather than going directly to a business broker or something like that. Not only if they want to consult you individually, but then you got books, you got YouTube videos, and then you got classes, training to help out someone who's like a rookie or a novice, but they're looking to start or buy some kind of business, correct?
Yeah, I don't get into the realm of startups.
Okay.
There's so many people out there who do a really great job of talking to people about how to start a business. What my notion is it's actually faster, easier, cheaper, and less risky to start to buy an already successful business than it is to start one up. And all you have to do is look at business failure statistics to know that a lot of startups have a really hard time getting off the ground because they're missing the key component, which is the customer, right? And when you buy a business that's already making money, you get the customers, which is the cornerstone of having success in business.
Well, and that's kind of where I'm also curious. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, this is advertising, but this is something I'm also curious about. I mean, you're no joke. I mean, I looked at your background. You and I graduated about the same year, and I went through banking. You went the business broker route, but then you also had a ton of training. Like, I was really impressed. I know it's the Canadians version because you are from Canada, but like you're certified in machinery evaluation. And this is stuff that we would get as credit analysts, or not. You just, here's the financial statements and the stuff you're talking about on your website, like all the window dressing tactics that sellers will do and inflating their book of business or making their financial statements look better the last couple of quarters. And then you buy a business and you find out that the income and the cash flow was only half of what they did. So, I mean, you're not some fly-by-night dude. You're an old guy like me. You've worked in the business and you know what you're talking about. So, I mean, this is not, oh, hey, I'm Billy Bing Bong in California and here's my flip the house thing. You are legitimate. And so if people are interested in buying a business as opposed to starting one, you would be someone I'd recommend going to. You're the guy to go to, correct?
Yeah, and I work with people all over the place. So back when I was a business broker, I was kind of isolated into my own community because business brokerage is something where you get tied into legal things, so licensing and all that kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
And when the problem with business brokerage is it's based on the real estate model. So people with businesses would come to me. I would list their business for sale. I would prepare all the documentation. Then I'd go and try to find a buyer. And the difference between a house and a business is sometimes it takes 3 years to sell a business.
Right.
And so it was a crazy roller coaster of cash flow. And whenever I did sell a business, the biggest commission check I ever received from a client was for $96,000. So I helped him turn his business into over $1 million. And he paid me that huge amount of money. And when I got my hands on the money, I was afraid to spend the money because I didn't know when the next check was coming. And so I did it for 3 years. I sold 36 companies. And I couldn't even commit with a financial advisor to make a certain contribution every month to my kids' education plan because I didn't know for certain how much money was coming through the door. And when I eventually decided to get out, I said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And what happened is I shut down my brokerage office. I made a deal with an associate. He took over all the files. And I went out, Aaron, if you can believe it, and I got a job. and
Oh
I
no,
actually got a job
no.
with a
Oh
bank.
God, that's like the worst word you could say on this channel. Oh my God.
Yeah. So I got a job with a bank, and I started to go out, and I was a territory credit manager. I did revolving credit programs for mid-sized companies. And I would be driving between customers, my phone would ring, and people would be saying, "Hey, I'm trying to buy this business, and someone gave me your name, and I need someone to guide me through this process." And I just kept saying, "No, it's not me. I'm not in that anymore. I don't do that anymore." And one day I was like, "Holy cow! People they don't want the business broker service I've been trying to do for the last 3 years. They want someone like an attorney or an accountant, but who's specialized in this kind of thing."
Right.
And so I said to one person one day, I said, "Look, I can help you, but I have a job. I'm going to have to work with you on the evenings and weekends, and I'm not a broker. I'm going to have to charge you a consulting fee by the hour." And the guy just said, "Okay, so you can meet me Saturday at 9?" And I was like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I can meet you Saturday at 9."
Sometimes it rains money. You're like, oh, this dang money. It's knocking at the door.
Well, it took me to have to change the way my head was aimed in order for me to actually hear what people I think had always been asking for all along. But I was in that paradigm of being a business broker, and so I couldn't hear what people were trying to say. And it was only when I got out of it and I looked back, I realized over the years there were all these people that came and talked to me all the time, and then they go do their own deals. And I always felt bad that they had taken advantage of my knowledge, but now I realize that people are more than happy to pay. They just want to pay for the help that they're looking for.
Right. And this is kind of along the lines of asshole consulting, where people, well, why would I hire this person? Well, especially in your case, I could see buying a business is a risky proposition, and it's worth dropping a couple hundred, even a couple thousand up front. Because while I worked in banking, I was a credit analyst and I was a banker, and I'd see it. Oh, I wouldn't see it when they would go buy it was already after the fact. Oh, I bought a bar for 1.5 million. I didn't realize the equipment was outdated. There were all these health files, you name it. And now they're bankrupt. They maxed out their 401k or RRSP. And it is worth, especially before you buy a business and you cash out your retirement savings and you sign on the dotted line, and not to mention invest all your time, it's worth throwing a couple bucks your way or to somebody who's got a better set of eagle eyes that have been there and you've gotten under the hood. I mean, again, if anyone wants to look at your background, go look at David's bio. You can spot something in a fraction of the time that they might take years to uncover, and by that time it's too late, and they're looking at bankruptcy or financial, not to mention the psychological strife. So I mean, it's definitely, this is why I was like, oh yeah, let's have him on as a sponsor. This is definitely because of, if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, get a set of eagle eyes like David, and it's. I mean, what percent? I'd imagine in your career, what percent of these businesses end up failing, or they people overpay for a business?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I sometimes get called by people who are looking at buying a business, and I'll give you a little snippet, recent example. A guy was looking at a franchise pizza restaurant, and the restaurant is nearing the end of its term as a franchise. And so with a lot of these franchises, when you reach the end of the term, the franchisor will renew the franchise term. But then this is the moment when they say, now we need you to update your premises to the new look and feel. So there's like a renovation that has to be done. And so this little pizzeria has a cash flow. And when I compare it to other pizzerias, I say this cash flow is worth about 150 to 170 grand. It's a little business. And someone can work in it full time with their family and have a good income. But the update and renovation is going to cost about 100 grand. And so what I was explaining to this client of mine, the buyer, is it doesn't matter who you give the money to. The cash flow is worth 150 to 170 grand. So if you're going to give $100,000 to a contractor to do fit ups and painting and new furnishings and things, that means you can only give 50 to 70 to the seller because it's the same cash flow, right? And people get hung up on this because they're like, well, wait a minute. The seller especially get upset because they say, we built up this business. This is what the business is worth. But you got this third party, the franchise company, saying, no, you got to spend this money. It's almost like a tax. It's almost like taking into consideration a tax when you're looking at a stream of cash flow from your credit analyst days, right? And so if that tax is being removed, all of a sudden the cash flow is diminished, it's worth less. And exactly the same kind of thing that happens when people are buying these businesses. And people often also get caught up in traps like operating capital. So they'll evaluate a business as a going concern, and the business has machinery, equipment, inventory, other capital assets, but it's also got operating capital in it. There's always a difference between receivables and payables, for example. And then someone will say, let's do the deal in a more simple fashion. Let's do an asset transaction. And when they do an asset deal, they'll then say, let's make it even simpler. Mr. Seller, you keep the receivables and the payables, you take care of that, and I'll start fresh. Well, if there's a net difference between the two, that means that the business requires a certain amount of capital to function. The price of the business, the value of the cash flow incorporates that capital, and now you're not getting it. And so time and again, for example, I'll see buyers enter into a deal where they'll fairly price the business and then not receive all the components. And they won't know any better, right? And they've effectively overpaid for the business.
Well, and a lot of this, I mean, okay, if you're like me, you ever watch like Bar Rescue or Restaurant Impossible?
I love that show.
I mean, see, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a lot of it boils down to like, look, if you don't know accounting, and you got to know not just accounting, but like accounting for that particular industry or that particular type of business, it is a huge risk. And again, it's definitely worth paying someone like you to go in there and kind of investigate. Although, who's the guy on Bar Rescue? The Italian guy? What's his name?
You mean the star?
Yeah, the star. What's his name?
Taffer?
So I'd love to have him go in there and just yell. And I mean, but since we can't afford, you're too busy making movies and show, they could go hire you instead. But yeah, no, it's a classic. I mean, if anyone is trying to figure out what you do, it would be somewhat similar to that. Or Robert Irvine, is he the big rip dude on Restaurant Impossible?
I don't know that show, but you
love that one. You love that.
You talk about knowing about accounting, and it's important to know about the different ways that things are accounted for in different industries, because you also have to learn what mistakes are commonly made. So when people show me, for example, a gym, right, or a tutoring business, for example, the very first thing I look for on the balance sheet is the deferred revenue, because a lot of the times these services are sold in advance. So you buy a 1-year membership to the gym.
Okay.
Right?
All right. Yeah.
So if they charge you, $120 for the 12-month membership to the gym, most gyms just record that as a $120 sale, but it's not. It's a $10 sale and a $110 loan. And to be accurately reflected in the financials, we should see a deferred revenue of $110 because they've effectively borrowed from the client cash today for a service they haven't delivered yet. And so when you start to look at these numbers in the books, you start to see the common threads of, people using QuickBooks at home and all this kind of stuff. And they're not expert bookkeepers. Right. But you learn where the mistakes often are. And then when you start to dig into them, I had another client the other day. He's buying a rental business. And like a lot of small businesses, the guy who owns the business does a certain amount of like under the table kind of stuff. And he does his own bookkeeping. So he buys tools, he rents them out. And when he buys the tool, it becomes part of his plant and equipment on his financials. And then when the tool is worn out, he sells it for cash. But the first thing I noticed on the financials is there was no gain or loss on the disposition of assets. So what ends up happening is every time he buys new tools, they go into his FF&E and his capital assets, but then they never leave.
So it's just got non-existent tools.
Just swells over time, and it doesn't reflect at all what's actually going on in the business. And so the first thing I said to the buyer was, has there been an inventory done? And do the tools in stock actually reflect what's on the balance sheet here? And if they don't, we then have to figure out what's going on, because if some of those tools have been sold and recorded as sales, then that means the sales figure isn't purely rental. And now we have a mixed up business model that's both the sale of stuff without adequate inventory control and management and the rental of stuff. And now we can't trust the bottom line at all.
Right. And it's basically, as kind of a rule of thumb, because again, I have a lot of people, followers, subscribers who are interested in starting. Here's kind of a simple rule of thumb. I'd say if you don't know the difference between cash and accrual accounting, or you don't know what FIFO and LIFO means, they might want to hire you. Correct, David?
Yeah.
Okay, that'd be a good thing. All right. There's another thing I'm really interested in. I'm sure the Canadian markets are the same way because this is global, with all these banks printing off money and low interest rates. The publicly traded markets, everyone says invest in your 401k, your RRSP, your IRAs, your KYOGs, all this other stuff. And that channels money towards retirement plans, which then has inflated publicly traded shares out there. The S&P 500, I don't know, last time I checked, it was 20. I stopped checking because when I started looking at dividend yields of 2%, basically you can make a 2% rate of return on your capital. I was like, forget it. And it more or less, also combined with my own personal life, entrepreneurship has provided a much higher rate of return. And so for a lot of people, going and investing in private companies, buying their own companies, or entrepreneurship, that, if done right, has the potential to provide much higher rates of returns than your 0.5% at your savings account or the 2% in your retirement funds. We're not talking capital gains. We're talking to people who know the difference between cash flow and actual rates of return from profits versus that of capital gains. Is there a market? I had another buddy tell me about, there's a lot of, the baby boomer generation is retiring. There are entrepreneurs. They have started their pizza shops or their mechanic shops or their plastic manufacturing widget company. Are there a lot of businesses coming up for sale? Is there a supply of viable, profitable businesses that younger people might have an interest in?
It's interesting because there's a couple of different answers to the string of questions that you put together there. Mm-hmm. But the answer is yes, no, and it's not the way it's been presented to us. So There are lots of books in the bookstore about this giant transfer of business wealth from the baby boom generation to the younger people. A lot of them are written by academics who work at universities where everyone aspires to retire right at 65.
I mean, Ryerson doesn't have a ton of entrepreneurs just sitting there that I'll be a professor as well.
So what I've seen personally is that, entrepreneurs do eventually retire, not at 65. They typically stay in it longer because think about it. You control your life. You get to decide what you're doing. If it's a good business, you're making good money, right? And so they'll hang on longer. But the other thing is that, you talked about people willing to accept lower rates of return. Actually, tomorrow on my YouTube channel, I'm releasing a video about zombie businesses. And zombie businesses are ones that it's what I call them when they contain dead capital. So people have made investments, they've put capital into something, and they're happy to accept no return. So let me give you an example. You have a successful business, and then you decide to buy the building that you're located in. And while the banker's on your heels with your mortgage, you work really hard. And then once the building's paid off, well, then you're not under the same kind of stress to perform. And so then you don't increase your prices as much, and you're not as aggressive in the market, and your sales slow down, but it's okay.
You're coasting. You're just coasting.
You're coasting, right? And so the video tomorrow is based on an article that was in Forbes where this guy was talking about how millennials may not be buying the Main Street businesses from the boomers. And what I've seen time and again, Aaron, is people who've built up these businesses, they have a huge amount of capital, and the capital is not giving an adequate rate of return. There's no way for the buyer to be able to borrow and leverage money to buy those assets using the cash flow that's there and pay for it. So what ends up happening is it's a breakup and dissolution. So the business eventually will just close, be liquidated, and then the building maybe is sold to some other guy who wants to redevelop it for its value as a piece of real estate. But because the owner was more than happy to receive no return on the money invested in the real estate, that's the only reason the business was able to survive. It essentially, the capital in the real estate subsidized the operation of the going concern.
Interesting. And is this universal or more? In other words, I'm wondering. I look at this as an opportunity because, like you said, there's lower risk in buying something that's already known and existing out there. Are there opportunities for people to buy? Or is this a very common phenomenon where it's just people are kind of like coasting and not charging as much, and these assets aren't generating the profits they could be, and are therefore undervalued, and they're liquidated?
If you can, what I always tell my students is if you can find a business that is profitable but has problems, that's where your opportunity is. Because quite often buyers bring a greater level of sophistication. The old Michael Gerber E-Myth thing, where he talks about how technicians start businesses doing the things they know how to do. Well, the buyers often tend to be people that have worked in a larger organization. They've worked at the bank, for example. They're used to policies and procedures and workflows and management tools, and they bring that into the business, and they're able to get the business to perform better. So if you find a business that makes money and it has problems that you can fix, that's your opportunity to grow and make a greater return. What the danger is, or what the problems are, is when you have more than one dissimilar asset mixed together in a corporation, for example, a building and a hardware store, let's say. Mm-hmm. And because you have them mixed together, you can still have a financial statement that shows that you're making a profit every year. But if a finance guy looked at the assets in the corporation that aren't on the books, so the real value of the real estate, not what's on the balance sheet, mm-hmm. and they said, what's the required rate of return for this kind of asset? Then the finance guy would say, well, we need to earn an 8% rate of return on the real estate. We need to earn a 37% rate of return on whatever is invested in the FF&E and the inventory in the hardware store. And of course, then you see that it's clear that the business isn't performing vis-a-vis the money invested. Now, the real estate question is one that comes up all the time, because people bring their homeowner mentality into business, and they think that it's better to be paying a mortgage than it is to be paying rent, right? Mm. Just like people want to own a home rather than rent an apartment. And there's a big reason why Walmart, most grocery store chains, most drugstore chains, they all lease, because they know that the cash that would be required for the down payment on the building is likely the same amount of money that is required to fill the shelves, right? But the stock on the shelves turns over every 30 days with a 30% margin, whereas the value of the real estate increases by 2% a year or 3% if they're lucky, right? And so they actually leverage the capital of their landlords to make a greater return on their own money by being tenants. And they also know, the big companies, that if Walmart moves into one place and they sign a 20-year lease, at the end of 20 years, chances are trade patterns have changed and it's mm-hmm. no longer the place to be. So now's the time to move, right? And I've seen so many times where these legacy businesses, multi-generational businesses, are trapped on Main Street when they should have moved out to the highway power center.
Oh yeah, you can see that. A lot of, I don't know if it's the same where you're out in Canada. You can see that. I live in the Plain States, and yeah, when the railroad went through, sure, that was the place to be. Well, now the trucks go through on the highway, and you can see downtown is dead, but there's a Walmart and a gas station and a strip mall, and that's where Papa John's is. So
yeah, and the old businesses get stuck because they own the buildings, and there never seems to be a point where it makes sense to acquire the expense of paying rent, and then eventually the location kills them.
Well, let's go on, because I don't want to take too much of my audience's time, because I do find this interesting. I mean, I'm almost going back to the days when I had a job. You have a lot of knowledge. This is more complicated than the average person. You were a farmer, or you were a computer programmer. You're sitting on $100,000 cash. Just in this conversation alone, if you've been listening to David, you know, oh wow, there's a lot more to know here than what I know. Let's talk about your services, because you do the advisory and consulting, but then you also have classes. Why don't you go through your inventory of services and how you help out any clients that are looking to potentially buy a business, and we'll go over the different sites and ways to get in contact with you as well.
So basically, I started off doing one-on-one services with people, and then I also was hired at one point by a government agency they're trying to grow the population by inviting people to move here from other countries. And what was happening is they were running into problems where people were being ripped off, essentially. And so I put together an education program where I teach people the basic steps. This is how you buy a business. This is all the first glance stuff you look at, and this is how you tell right off the bat if it might be a good deal or if it isn't. And so eventually that grew into a seminar program that's about 9.5 hours long, and that's Business Buyer Advantage.
And this is the intro one. This is just...
Yeah, that's the intro one. So right now, if someone goes to businessbuyeradvantage.com and they sign on for the online course, it's 9.5 hours. The great thing, though, is that it's all recorded modules, so you go through it at your own pace. So you don't have to do it all in one day or anything like that. And you can go back to it over and over again. And so then from that, of course, then the other side of the coin, I ended up creating an exit planning program, which is only 3 hours, but similarly, it's like an online course. And when I was a business broker, I often had to work with people to help them prepare their businesses for sale. So I also have an online program where I talk about how to systematize and organize a small business in an easy to follow 13-step process. So the online courses are the way that people learn. The intro to that are some of my books. So I've got 7 different titles on Amazon right now. I've got a book on local investing. So if you like small business and you're looking for returns, but you don't want to be a small business person, my book, Invest Local, for example, talks about how I invest my own money in small local businesses and what I look for and what I do to set it up to protect myself from things going wrong. And then there's Franchise Warnings, which was a bestseller in 2015. It's all about the horrific things I've seen in the world of franchising, because everyone out there writing a book on franchising is trying to help you pick the right one, because they've all got their finger in the honey jar, right? Mm-hmm. At every level through the franchise ecosystem, everyone's getting paid when somebody signs on the dotted line. So it's one of the few books out there that actually caution people about what can go wrong.
Well, I like that. It sounds cool too. Like, I mean, there's going to be some interesting stories, I'd imagine, in that one as well.
Yeah. And it's, and it's kind of funny because I actually do work with some franchisors. I'm a preferred supplier with some well-known franchise brands. When they have franchisees that want to sell, they will refer their franchisee to me. And when I started talking with these people, the first thing I do is mail them a copy of Franchise Warnings. I said, you've got to read this, because all of your people, if they see my name and they Google it, they're going to find this book. And the franchisors that read the book and go, wow, that's a good book. I'm like, okay, here's someone who believes that they're delivering value to the people in their system. And that's, to me, that's an important thing. And so, yeah, so there's the education through the online courses. I do some of my workshops live. I travel around and deliver them throughout the year. And then there's the books. And basically, it's a way for me to leverage my time to help more people more quickly. And when people do the online courses and things, they get access to my information without having to pay my hourly rate. So it's being a better value for the person that wants to learn.
All right. And then just so you know, because you have businessbuyeradvantage.com. That's the flagship site, shall we say?
That's the flagship site for people that want to buy a business, businessbuyeradvantage.com.
And then David C. Burnett, that leads to a blog, or just go through all your websites. So if you want to buy a business, businessbuyeradvantage.com, you want to talk to David, where do we go?
Yeah, businessbuyeradvantage.com is for people that want to buy a business. The blog site is davidcbarnett.com. That's kind of the central nervous system, where my new posts go up all the time. How to Sell My Own Business is the site where I talk with people that own a business that want to sell. Easy Small Biz Systems is where I talk about organizing and systematizing businesses. But if someone goes to davidcbarnett.com, they're going to find all the stuff. And there's a little tab that says Work with David, where I say, if you want to buy a business, go here. If you want to sell a business, go here. So there's a little directory that shows people where to go.
All right,
and if people are just keen to learn about the whole idea of deal making, buying, selling, and managing businesses, I think the YouTube channel is up to 230 videos. And so literally, and all the audio is ripped every week to go into the iTunes podcast. So I get emails from people who say, I just drove, halfway across the United States and I listened to 17 hours of David Barnett. And people can do that, and it's all there and it's all free. So help yourself.
Yeah. And that it was cool. I'll admit, I was, because I have a different background, but I was kind of interested because I didn't deal much with franchises, but there's some stories in there too. It's not just you talking about debits and credits and income statements. There's like, well, I had this one client and then all of a sudden at the end of the video, you've learned something where it's like, oh crap, I got to pay attention the next time. But basically, if you listen to the YouTube, you're going to find out David is not BSing you. There's a risk in buying some businesses. And you could listen to all 17 and you're still not going to come close to knowing everything you need to know. So, but no, it was a really interesting YouTube channel. I was just listening to it when I was, interestingly enough, driving from Wisconsin back to Minnesota. But yeah, it's definitely, that's another thing. Check out the YouTube. Real quickly, the podcast, if people don't want to do it on streaming, what's the name of the podcast?
It's the David C. Barnett Small Business and Deal Making podcast, I believe.
And that's iTunes is
on
the
iTunes, yeah.
All right. And then what's the RSS? Are you through SoundCloud or?
I'm through SoundCloud. Yeah, that's right.
SoundCloud. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. Is there anything else you want to tell my audience about you or your business or anything like that?
No, the only thing is simply that if you want to really leverage the advantages of the tax system, the people that are in charge, they own businesses. And so the rules are written to create advantages for them. And if you want to become a business owner to leverage the efforts of other people, your employees and the rules and et cetera, you need to get into business if you want to get ahead. And like I said, it's faster, cheaper, and easier and less risky to buy something that's already working for somebody else. But it doesn't make sense to get into a bad deal and overpay or buy something under the wrong terms and conditions. And so, this is what I do. I help people with it. And if people want to go down this journey, help yourself to the free information, listen to it all, and you're going to learn a lot. And the stuff in the courses is not in the free videos. So there's even more that I can teach you before you ever have to actually talk to me and pay me by the hour. So
cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, David. I appreciate you giving me your time so we could figure this out and explain, because a lot of times I'm just like, here's some bullet points the guy said and all that. But no, thank you very much for your time. And we'll be plugging you on the podcast and putting you on the blog.
Awesome, Aaron. Thanks so much. I'm a big fan, by the way. I love the podcast.
Oh, cool. Well, I'm glad at least one person does. That's all right. Thanks, all right. David. I'll catch you later.
Talk to you later. Bye.
All right.